Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Our speaker today is Roger Corless, and he is our beloved Dharma Daddy, a former professor emeritus of religion at Duke University. He is the author of several books, including the widely praised Vision of Buddhism, The Space Under the Tree. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you. I see in the newsletter it does say I'm a former professor emeritus, which would mean that I'm addressing you from beyond the grave. Professor emeritus means that I've retired without getting into any trouble. And so I won't be a former professor emeritus until I have passed on to another incarnation. But I retired and moved here about a year or two ago. And as was mentioned, I do the Dharma Daddy column in the newsletter. And because you were supposed to write to Daddy and ask him questions, and you were very naughty and didn't, so I had to take the initiative and do something on my own. So in this latest newsletter, I've worked with the editor Michael, who's here somewhere. Decided that what I do is, if nobody asks me something, I will make my own suggestion, which relates to. I'll write my own column relating to the main topic. But you are still welcome to write to Daddy and ask him questions about faith or practice. I don't answer questions of the Ann Landers sort. Well, my topic today is sex. And perhaps if you knew that, more people would show up, because we all want to know about that. It was said that when the Masters and Johnson book on the human sexual response was published, everybody rushed out to buy it to look themselves up. So we want to know something about this. It is, of course, one of the more powerful, maybe the most powerful of the energies of the human rebirth. According to Buddhism, it's not that powerful in other forms of rebirth. It isn't, for instance, in the animal realm. It's not that important. Animals tend to come into and out of heat, and when they're out of heat, there's no interest in it. And in the deity realms, they have other things that occupy them, which they find more interesting, and it's the human that seems to be involved in that. So it's something that we need to address. It so happens that though retired, I've been still doing. I haven't retired from life, really. I've retired from doing full-time teaching at one particular place, a university back east, which will refrain from mentioning, but I refer to as the theme park of the Evil Duke. So you can probably imagine where that is. And so in the past academic year, I've actually presented 3 academic papers on the topic of Buddhism and sex, trying to address particularly the place of the LGBTQI or queer person. We seem to have so many letters now in our list that I think we just say queer, it's simpler, person to the issue. And this talk, in a sense, is going to be something of a summary of that. The other papers don't have any immediate plans to be published, but I'll let you know what comes of it. And I have my new transition glasses, which are supposed to help me to read, but they don't do as well as they would, as I would hope they would do. The first thing to say about Buddhism and sex is that it's pretty bad news. And I think it's typified by the remark of the gay poet James Broughton, who said, "The Buddha was very down on sex. Broughton is very up on sex." And it's quite true that Buddhism, as we know it up to now, has a lot to say about sex, and practically all of it is negative. Most of the time, people who become Buddhist, whatever that actually means, it's not clear to me that anybody could become Buddhist until Buddhism came to the USA. And then at that time, Buddhism became a religion, because by becoming a religion, it gets protection from the law and from taxes. And so it's helpful for it to become that. And otherwise, I don't think it was a religion. But once it becomes a religion in the USA, people can convert to it. Then they often feel that Buddhism is more liberal than the Christian tradition because they haven't heard much about Buddhism and sex. This is simply because I think Buddhism is not organized in a social way that is like the Christian tradition. It really doesn't have an institution that legislates for all or even for many Buddhists. The media regards Buddhism as a religion on the model of Christianity, because it's the only thing it knows really, because of the hegemony of the post-Christian civilization on the world. And so it wants a pope of Buddhism, and it chose the Dalai Lama for mysterious reasons that go back to Victorian occult traditions, I suppose. And the poor man has now supposed to speak for all of Buddhism. He doesn't even speak for all of Tibetan Buddhism. And there is not only is the Dalai Lama not the Pope of Buddhism, there is no possibility of having anything like a Pope of Buddhism. Very often we find that when people get together to practice Buddhism in the West, they ignore what is in the tradition in regard to sex. And that's especially the case, I think, in GBF, where we say, well, we're going to get together and practice as gay Buddhists, and we're going to leave that other thing, and every now and then we have a session on it, but we don't address it in a systematic way. However, the problem is that when we look at what Buddhism has to say about sex, we find two things which are problematic. First of all, it is all negative. So then it sounds like we shouldn't be having any kind of sex. But then we find the reason that it is all negative is that practically all of the discussion of sex is in the Vinaya. Vinaya, V-I-N-A-Y-A, that is the section of the text concerned with the monks or nuns, as we call them in English. They're not really monks or nuns, those are Christian words, but the bhikshunis, it'll do for now, monks or nuns. Anyhow, the thing is that a monk or nun is not supposed to have any sex at all. And the monastic code goes on at great length about what kind of sex they shouldn't have. The reason for this is that the way that the monastic code was put together was casuistic, that's to say a case-by-case basis. Those of you who are familiar with notions of law in general will know the distinction between the apodeictic and the casuistic. The apodeictic law is something like in the Ten Commandments, which says this is a list of what you shouldn't do. You shall not do so and so and so and so and so and so. Whether or not anybody actually ever attempted to do those things, here's a list of what you shouldn't do, and it comes down from the authority, whoever the authority is, whether it happens to be God or a human. The casuistic law is not a proactive, as apodeictic law is, but it is a reactive. When something happens, questions arise, should people do this or not? And then a decision is made, yes, no, or yes in certain circumstances, no in certain circumstances. And the monastic code in Buddhism arose in this way. In regard to sex, for instance, there was a particular monk who was very sickly and not doing well, and he says, I just don't like the monastic life, I'm just not very... I can't take it, it's very miserable. And his friend, also a monk, says, well, what you should do is you should eat more and sleep more, and whenever you feel miserable, you should masturbate. And he says, it's a thing I do all the time. And so the other monk says, oh, well, I'll try that. So he eats more and he sleeps more, and then when he feels miserable, he masturbates. And he gets healthier, puts on weight, and he feels great. And the other monks say, how did this happen? And he says, well, this is what I did. They think, well, I don't know whether they're supposed to do that. So they go to the Buddha and say, should he do that? The Buddha says, no. The monastic life is not about indulgence, it's about giving things up. And so you shouldn't do that. Oh. So then they say, that becomes the law that a monk should not intentionally emit semen. So later, some monks began having wet dreams. And they said, oh dear, maybe we have to leave the monastic life because we're having wet dreams. So they asked the Buddha and say, what's going on here? Well, he says, well, that's really all right because you didn't intend to do that. It just happened. It's the fruiting of karma or something from a previous time. So then the rule is modified. A monk shall not intentionally emit semen. Okay, and that's now in the monastic rule. Then there were other strange things which came from the fact that there was a monk, the case of the monk with the flexible back, who gave himself blowjobs. And the monk, the Buddha said, no, shouldn't do that. And the monk with the long penis, who fucked himself up the arse. Buddha said, no, shouldn't do that. And so it goes on. And it's really, I think, if you're in a relationship and it's getting a bit sort of bland, and you wonder what else you can do, you can look through the vinaya and find things that you might like to try. But the effect of all this is that if you're a monk or nun, especially if you're a nun, you don't know what to do with all this about the intentional emission of the semen. But anyhow, you have all these lists of things not to do. And you're living in the problem, I think. But in any case, the concentration is on the action of the genitals, which is prohibited in an intentional kind of way. So it is quite unhelpful to a layperson. And the second thing to notice then is that today, in the US particularly, and most of Northern Europe too, and in other parts of the world now more and more, not so much in Asia yet, but in Africa and Australia and so forth, and South America, where the Dharma, Buddhism, is becoming more interesting to people. It's lay people, or non-monastics. In fact, people like us really are not even lay Buddhists. The founder of Zen Center, Suzuki Roshi, said, today people are not monks, most are not monks, they're not even lay people, because a lay person traditionally is defined as a person who supports the monks and nuns. Now some of you may be giving some donations to another Sangha also, but we don't have monks coming in that we give food to and then they go out and then we do something else. We're not really lay people, we're something else. And so we look in the text and say, what can we do? What in regard to sex? Because we're not under vows not to have any sex. We haven't gone through the formal process of saying, I will be a Buddhist monk or nun, if we're a woman. So what do we have? And we look in the rest of the Buddhist tradition, and there is one of the 5 major precepts which says, I undertake the rule of training not to practice mithya, sort of, which means something wrongfully, misdeeds in regard to karma or sensuality. That's karma, K-A-M-A, not K-A-R-M-A, which isn't pronounced the same way in Sanskrit. In English we say karma for both, which is confusing because the word K-A-R-M-A, karma, means action. Karma, K-A-M-A, means something to do with the senses, sensuality, especially sex. So say, oh, well, it's me karma. It's a confusing thing to say. So maybe we should talk English and then not use technical terms unless we can pronounce them properly. Or Daddy will be very annoyed if you mispronounce the technical terms. Yes. So this is pretty general, not to avoid misdeeds in regard to sensuality. In general, it tends to be taught as no adultery. And so it assumes a heterosexual marriage, and often it assumes that it's the husband who's being addressed, though often now the wife is addressed in this. And really not much else is said about that. There is one passage I've come up with in the Tibetan tradition, which is remarkably detailed, and it shows you what a Buddhist can do if they really want to be precise about all of this. And it regards the layperson, and it states there are 3 types of sexual misconduct for the layperson. Protected by the family, protected by the owner, and protected by the Dharma. The first one means sexual misconduct with one's mother, sister, and so forth. The second one means sexual misconduct with someone owned by a husband or king, and so forth. The third one has 5 subcategories. Even with one's own wife, sexual misconduct refers to improper parts of the body, improper place, improper time, improper number, and improper behavior. Improper parts of the body are the mouth and the anus. Improper places are close to the spiritual master, the monastery, or the stupa, or in a gathering of people. Improper times are during a special retreat, when pregnant, while nursing a child, or when there is light. So you see, you can't have sex in the daytime in the open air. And I knew someone who said, oh, that's what I like the best, so I couldn't do that. If Buddhists can't do that. An improper number is more than 5 times. This must be 5 times in the night, because you've got to finish up before the light comes, you see. Improper behavior refers to beating or having intercourse with a male or with a person that's in this translation called a hermaphrodite in the mouth or the anus. The translation of hermaphrodite here is the pandaka. Who a pandaka is not at all clear. It's someone who has some kind of perceived sexual misfunction, and it doesn't always mean hermaphrodite or homosexual or eunuch, as it's sometimes translated. It doesn't seem to be, it's difficult to identify this personage. In Queer Dharma Volume 1, there's an article on homosexuality in Buddhism in modern Thailand, in which the author goes to some great lengths to discuss the different sorts of people who are known as by this name. And it appears to be a medical kind of category that we cannot make a lot of sense of today. So this is all terribly unhelpful, I think. I didn't find any of this helpful in my thinking about what kind of sex is permitted to a person practicing the Dharma. It seems to me that this list, it's in some cases it sees sexual misconduct as similar to stealing, because it assumes it's addressed to the man, and it assumes that there are certain women who are possessed by others, and you shouldn't take them from them. They will be annoyed if you take their women away. Then it is also as something that is harming to the partner. This I think we can understand. Rape is I think we can say that in Buddhism, because of the emphasis on non-harming, this is a precept that we can understand today. It continues to be of some relevance. And then there seems to be something that's abhorrent to established custom, like not having sex, for instance. And I've been told, if in the room you have a picture of your guru, you can't have sex in that room. And then, of course, you couldn't have sex in the presence of the guru. I mean, as if you would really, but so that may be something to do with custom, and these customs change, of course. And then there's the notion of it's something addictive. I mean, the person being addressed here is the randy male who can't stop. And such a person today is not really regarded as being having a moral problem, but a psychological problem. And we say, have you talked to your psychiatrist lately? And then, as I said, the sexual dysfunction, which is something of the medical thing. So this is not helpful. And then people say, so the only thing I can get from this is that sexual misconduct which is harmful to the partner, that's the only thing that I can retrieve from this as being helpful. Then people say, oh, but of course that's in the monastic tradition and still, or the sutra tradition. And when you go into the tantric tradition, you see in the tantric tradition all these monks and nuns are just on the job all the time, and they're just sexual and spiritual, and they're so into the body and so forth. Well, I think this is not helpful. I've seen advertisements for come to Maui and spend a weekend of tantric ecstasy with your partner under the instruction of such a person, and there's this picture of this man and woman, and they're about 35, and they're just in perfect glowing health, and it's only about $5,000, you see. So it's all very nice that you can have this tantric sex, but I think that in the tradition, the tantric sex is kept secret. If you can find out about what the tantra is, it's because you had an initiation, and if you've had an initiation, you're not supposed to tell anybody else, because you're messing with very powerful kinds of things. You don't go into the tantra, as I understand it, on your own any more than you would go to psychoanalyze yourself. You're going to get down into the messy stuff, and you need a professional to help you work that out. And then you can't go telling everybody else. Like, have you had these people who've had a bit of psychotherapy and they say, I know what's wrong with you, and they tell you how to fix yourself. No, that's not going to work. So in any case, the tantric procedure is a visualization most of the time of the exchange of energies, which is heterosexist in its symbolism. It assumes the active part of the male, and the female is just a surd, really. And it is for the enlightenment of the male during the session, so that he can go out and be more helpful to people in everyday life. It's not about recreational sex on Maui, and it's not about real sex. So the point of it is then that when we look at traditional Buddhism, in my estimation, we get no direct help at all. I want to be quite upfront about this. I know some people have tried to excuse the Buddhist tradition of being, well, this, that, and the other, but I really think that we have the opportunity now, I mean, this is the other side of it, to do something else. Traditionally, Buddhism has been the preserve of the monastics. The Buddha was a monk, and he legislated for the monastics. And the lay people were people who didn't have the good fruiting of karma to become monks or nuns in this incarnation, and had to do something that would be good and wait around until afterwards. A couple of times protests have been made about this. The most remarkable would be in the 1200s in Japan. Shinran gave up on the monastic tradition, got married, and proposed that because the end of the Dharma was now here, the end of the ages has now come upon us, it'll be impossible for us to practice as monks or nuns. He says, I couldn't do it, so nobody else can do it. And then they formed a married clergy, which is now the normal tradition for the Jodo Shinshu, the true lineage of Pure Land Buddhism, as it's called, represented in San Francisco by the BCA, the Buddhist Churches of America, whose headquarters are on Octavia Street between Pine and Bush, and there the San Francisco Buddhist Church, as they call it, is there, and they meet at 9:30 or 10 or something on a Sunday morning, and you're welcome to go there and check out what they do. They have kind of nice services with hymns and stuff, and you feel quite familiar if you're Methodist, it'll feel quite at home. But the intent is to get into connection with the Buddha Amida, but there is no monastic order in that tradition. But still there's a hierarchy of priests, of the priests who get married, and then they tell you what to do. And only recently was there a big protest against this. A few Sundays ago, we heard from Diana Elrod, and she's also got the piece in the latest GBF newsletter. At SGI, the Soka Gakkai International had a big breakup with its clerical parent, and has tried to go its own way. And it seems to me that that's the first truly sort of lay movement that has some kind of democracy thing. There are other things, something like that. The Rissho Gosekai, which is also based on Lotus Sutra, is something similar to that. But I'm really interested in what the SGI is up to with all of that. Some people are upset with SGI because it doesn't seem like real Buddhism, because they make so much noise. And on that issue, please read my column in the newsletter. You may not like it, but it's very traditional Buddhism. There's a lot of other Buddhists who do that kind of thing. And I want to make some mention of them also. So, the thing is now, we are in this kind of, we're neither monk nor lay people, monastic nor lay people. We're trying to understand the Dharma, and we don't have any help in regard to sex directly. So what can we find, and what can we find also that's distinctive to being queer? Is there something disadvantage or advantage in that? Well, actually, this is where some people will shut down and leave the room immediately. We get a lot of help from the Christian tradition. When people say, I'm not here to help our Christians, I gave that all up. I came here to head the Buddhism because Buddhism is peaceful and nice, and Christianity is nasty and so forth. Actually, it can be both ways. I remember once teaching a course in Buddhist-Christian dialogue here at Integral Studies, and somebody said, well, you know the problem with Christianity? It's got this vengeful God. And my mother said to me, if you don't do so-and-so, you'll go to hell. But in Buddhism, it's all very sweet and light. And a man in the class said, excuse me, I was brought up in the Chinese tradition, in a Chinese family. We weren't completely Buddhist, but we did a lot of Buddhist things. And my mother said to me, if you don't eat up all your rice, you'll be reborn as a chicken. And I've heard that before from a number of people who are brought up in that tradition, the Chinese tradition. In the Buddhist tradition, you're taught if you're naughty, you'll get a nasty rebirth. So it's what's the difference? I mean, you could go to hell for eternity, or you go to hell for 5 million years. I mean, it doesn't. The Buddhist hells aren't eternal, but they go on for millions of years. So you don't want to go there. So what's the difference? I don't see it. So let's open our minds and say maybe Christianity isn't all that bad because Buddhism isn't all that good. And it turns out that despite the problems with Christian views of sexuality, and you probably know as much or more about that than I do, it has a couple of interesting things happening there. First of all, it quite in a very orthodox, very central way, it proposes that the union of the man and woman in matrimony is a mystical symbol of the union of Christ and the church. Now, if we don't believe in a God and we don't think Jesus is God and so forth, the specifics of that don't help. But the notion that we have a tradition that says the union of the man and woman is of cosmic proportions and is noble. It is a symbol of the Christian tradition. It's a symbol of what the gospel is all about. Christianity is all about the union of the divine and the human. And that this is happening with Christ and the church and the man and woman. Why is it that in the Buddhist tradition there is absolutely no, as far as I can see, discussion of the nobility of sex? It's all about what's happening to dicks and where they're being put and where they shouldn't be put and what's happening to the whole person here. I want to look at that and see, does Buddhism have anything that's more noble than that we can sort of bring out of it? And the second thing in the Christian tradition comes especially from Luther. This was a bit of a surprise as I reflected on this, but the more I thought about this, the more it made sense. And I was able to have a talk with I think he's the president now of Pacific Lutheran Seminary over in Berkeley, who has especially written on this, and so was extremely helpful on Luther and sex. Martin Luther, as you may know, was a monk, and he gave it up as part of his reform of the Christian tradition, and he married a former nun. And at first he said, well, the institution of marriage is instituted by God to save us from just whoring around. It means that if you get horny, well, there's your wife. So, okay, that's it. You don't go everywhere. So that it's instituted by God to keep sex in control and to bring up children in a Christian environment. That's what he thought as a monk. But then he became a husband and a father, and he had to put up with bickerings of wives and crying of children, and it's always in the fact. He says the annoyances of marriage are endless. We might say, I noticed what you did. You left the top of the toothpaste tube again and you squeezed it from the middle. See, this is intolerable. I would not stand for this. You see. So, the annoyances, and he said, what's happening? I'm learning more about forbearance and charity and kindliness in marriage than I ever did in the monastery. In the monastery I could say, okay, I'm going to meditate and pray. Don't come near me, I'm meditating and praying. That's it. But in marriage you don't have, there's stuff going on all the time in a relationship. So he called it the school for charity. The marriage is a school for charity. He says it's much better than being a monk. So he was very positive about the virtues of that. But what he was saying is, marriage or sex is not about where your dick goes. It's about relationships. And I think that that's much more helpful for us, because also I think that when the straight world looks at gays and lesbians, they tend to concentrate on what's happening in bed. And so I like the joke that appeared in The Advocate a long time ago, when The Advocate was a real newspaper and you could read it. So the straight person, this was a cocktail party. The straight person is asking the gay man who knows that he's in a relationship, what do you do in bed? And he says, we watch the Late Show. What do you do? So the notion that the only thing that's distinctive is the motion of the genitals, it leaves out the whole person. So then we ask, is there anything in Buddhism about interrelationship? Well, duh. It's all about that. Buddhism is about interdependent arising and interrelationships. It says that's the way everything comes to be. That's why there's the teaching that there's no God who brings everything into being. We can't say it's all because of God this has happened. Who made up the world? We made up the world, and we made a mess of it. That's the bad news. But because we made it up, we can undo it bit by bit. It may take a long time, but we can do it. So interrelationship is the main thing there. So we can be more aware of interrelationships rather than saying, "Well, I want to meditate. Don't talk to me. I'm meditating." Be aware of interconnections. You can practice on the road, I suppose. Of course, in San Francisco, you may not be driving, but there's another thing you can do there. But when we're driving, we tend to think I'm the only person on the road. I certainly think that there should be not only an HOV lane, but there should be a Roger lane. And then I can go wherever I want and nobody's in my way. But it doesn't seem to work out that way. It seems that it's interrelationship. And the whole thing is we're all trying to get to our destination fairly quickly and all safe and sound. If you don't drive, but you take a bus in San Francisco, excellent time to practice. Now, people say, I have no time to meditate. I say, do you have to wait for the Muni? You instead of waiting for the Muni, say, when's it going to come? Just stand there and just be. And you can say, of course, there is the mantra, Oh Muni Muni Maha Muni. You could use that one. But anyhow, that's if you want to. Just wait there. So we can be more aware of the text about interrelationship. This talk is not going to give you a full list of things that will solve the whole issue. It's moving you towards all of this. The other thing then is in all the Buddhist traditions, especially in Theravada, there is mention of the Brahma Viharas. I call them the pure abidings. Quite how you translate these is not too clear. People have different ideas about them, but the pure abidings are the basic virtues expressed in positive terms, and they're normally listed like this. Metta, I'm speaking in the Pali now, because they're mostly described there in things like the Visuddhimagga of Buddhaghosa. Metta is from the root mitta, or friend, treating everybody, all beings, as friends. If I treat someone as a friend, I have a care for their welfare, but I don't go into deep depression if they don't call me back. You see, I think, well, it's unfortunate. I wish they'd call me back. I wonder what's up. But I don't think, if he doesn't call, I'm just dead. If he doesn't call, I'm just dead. I don't have this addictive clinging thing. If it's a friendship, I can say, well, I really care for you, and I don't know why you didn't call me back. I mean, we're supposed to get together at a certain place, and you didn't show. So I went and did something else. And I'm disappointed, but it's not the end of the world. And what's happening with you? Can I help you with something? The next virtue is called Karuna, Karuna, which is sympathy, normally said to be sympathy or empathy, meaning being sympathetic with or feeling along with the suffering of another. This, I think, is something we all think, well, this is a very good thing. Yes, if I feel somebody suffering, I'd like to enter into their suffering. And we feel this is not too difficult to practice. Of course, if you're having a headache, I don't have a headache, so it doesn't quite the same thing, but it's I can feel something about that. More difficult is the next Brahmavihara, mudita, which is feeling the joy of another. You know, two people enter the lotto, and I think, oh dear, I got all the numbers except one. A friend says, oh, I got them all, I've got $10 million. And I say, oh, I'm so happy for you. That's quite difficult. But it's good to do, it's good to practice, right? And then the last is upekka, which literally means even eyes, seeing everybody in the same way. Friend or foe, someone you like, someone you don't like, someone who you think is really ugly, someone who's really hot. You see, well, they're all valuable in the same way. And so if we practice all of those, in fact, Buddha also says, the student who wishes to begin with the development of the 4 divine states, as this translation has it, should first think on the evils of hate and the advantages of forbearance. Why? Verily, by means of this practice, hate is to be put away, forbearance is to be acquired. So, that's an excellent thing to have, as I say, if your partner leaves the top off a toothpaste tube and squeezes it from the middle. I mean, how can you put up with that? You have to practice forbearance so you can get around with that. Now, in the Mahayana, we have more extensive things about this. Especially, I would say, the Avatangsaka Sutra, a very long sutra, translated into three volumes in English. The main teaching of which is the interdependence, the interpenetration, in fact, not interdependence, but even the interpenetration of liberation and suffering, of freedom and suffering, of the Buddha realm and the realm of suffering beings, which interpenetrates in every possible kind of way, so that even in specks of dust there are said to be millions of Buddhas on lotus thrones teaching the Dharma. So everything becomes infinitely valuable. And everything is the center. Not me. I'm not the only center. Well, yes, I am the center of the world. But so are you, and so are you. Everybody is the center. And everybody is infinitely valuable. And every object is infinitely valuable too. Not just the sentient or living beings. And that, if that attitude is brought into a relationship, it should help. The other texts that are helpful are the Tathagata Sutras, the sutras on the world as being the matrix or womb of the Buddhas. Not much has been done in English on these. There's one translation of the Lion's Roar of Queen Srimala, which is helpful, but it supports the notion of everything being Buddha nature. And then we have the Vimalakirti Sutra, which is a fairly medium-length text, which is extremely funny, and I'd actually like to give a talk on that sometime, because it is so amusing. It's about a layman who is able to best the best of the teachers in the monastic tradition. He knows more than they do, and only the Bodhisattva of wisdom, Manjushri, is able to engage him in dialogue without being stumped. And he is a lay person who's married, and he drinks and he goes to whorehouses and everything, but he's able to stay focused on the Dharma. So there's an idea that a lay person is able to achieve something important in all of that. Okay, well that's for sex in general, but then how about being queer? in this respect, the feminists are ahead of us, in that the feminists in literary studies and queer studies, as we call it, I think, a little bit now, they have pointed out that our standard consensus reality is dependent upon the reifying of the subject-object split, which comes from the reifying of the male and the female. And that this is simply a mistake. This is not the way reality is. And they have proposed ways to get around this by nurturing the feminine consciousness. I think that we can take a hint from these people and say the queer consciousness is even more effective in dissolving up the reifications of these things. And that's what Buddhism is all about too. Buddhism is about dissolving up reifications. So we can say, I think, some people have said that the Dharma is feminine. And I would say, we can say the Dharma is queer. It queers reality. It says what you think is going on is not what's going on at all. And then we can go one further, and we can go to the teaching of Harry Hay. I'm going to get the end of time here, but you probably know something about him. If you don't, you really should do, and please talk to me afterwards for some books on him. He's now living in San Francisco. Los Angeles was not too kind to him, so he came up to San Francisco, where the fairies are doing him looking after him much more than the social services were in Los Angeles. And he's not too well. I'm hoping to talk to him in a little bit when he gets a little bit stronger. But he's known as the founder of the modern gay movement. And he has proposed that the gay consciousness, as he called it, which I can say also the queer consciousness, is not subject-object, but subject-subject. Because he notices that when a man has an affection for another man, it's not for another, but for another me. So he calls this the subject-subject consciousness, more than the subject-object consciousness. And I think this is more compatible with Buddhist notions of non-duality. So I think we can bring this in to the discussion of all of this. And then we can look at what's been happening finally at SGI, and they are mining the Lotus Sutra, which has a lot of things in it. Some of the things are not as pleasant as others, but they've looked for the nice things, and come up with the notion that everybody has the Buddha nature. And my research into them recently noticed something which I thought was rather interesting. Some people will sometimes say, in SGI they say, you chant for anything and you get whatever you want. Just chant for anything and you get anything you want. I talked to lesbian and gay people who said, I chanted for years to become straight. I mean, for 10 years I chant day in, day out, I want to become straight, because I couldn't be happy unless I was straight. And nothing happened. I didn't change. But then I found out that just there was a big alteration in how SGI viewed things, that we're talking about Buddha nature as my true potential. And when I realized my true potential is to be gay or lesbian or queer, I chanted to fulfill my true potential, and now my life has changed around and I'm feeling wonderful and I'm doing all these active things. So trying to see that the true potential of the person could be male, female, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, something like that. Whatever is our true potential, that's the Buddha nature. And that itself is also opposed to consensus reality. So we can also say the Buddha nature is queer. Now, with all of those things in place, I think I can let you go home and do your homework, and you can figure out something that would be a dharmology or Buddhist theology of sex, which would be suitable for our condition, and would have some rules or guidelines, and wouldn't just be this, as I've heard very often, you shouldn't harm anybody. I mean, that's not really helpful. We want something more specific than that. So I presented you with some ideas of that. I suppose I was supposed to leave some time for questions, but I haven't. Do we want to take a bit of time?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think of Mother Ann Lee and the Shakers, which are a small group in the 1800s who were perceived as being anti-sex in popular culture. Actually, Mother Ann Lee had 18 children, and she knew that as long as there was sex, women would be oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole procreative thing, that once you have anyone who cares about dignity and justice before the advent of birth control almost had to be against sex because it imprisoned women.
Mm.
So I just found that very important. Women could live with women in Shaker communities, and men with men.
Yes.
To prevent the oppression of women. Just so that whole idea of some of the prohibitions against sex, at first glance, seem anti-sex. But if you look harder, often there's some compelling ethical thing that I just thought of that as you were talking.
Yes, well, that is actually, it has been shown by what's his name, who does that early work on the saints, whose name escapes me now, that the interest in taking the vows of virginity in the early church were very often about the woman saying, I'm taking control of my body. Miriam Levering also has done some interesting research on Chinese nuns, and she reports the same kind of thing. Nuns say to her, I was put in this dreadful marriage, I was going to marry this awful man, and I said, no, I'm going to be a nun. And now instead of being a servant in a household for this dreadful man, I become the abbess, and I'm in charge of the monastery, and I have respect. So the celibacy is a way of saying, within a patriarchal society, it's a way of the woman being able to take charge of things, yes.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.